Hello, my name is Brent Hungerford, and I am here today to explain who Newton is, what Newton's first law of motion is, also called the law of inertia, what inertia is, and where do we see the Newton's first law in everyday life. Well, let's start out with who Newton is. Isaac Newton was a philosopher, mathematician, astronomer, physicist, and a scientist. He lived from 1643 to 1727. He is known as one of the greatest minds of the 17th century. Newton was born as a premature baby and was not expected to survive on January 4th of 1643. His mother left him when he was 3 years old to go live with her new husband. Newton graduated from Cambridge University. In 1665, Newton had to leave Cambridge because of the Great Plague. Newton went home for 18 months. During the 18 months, Newton experienced the inspiration of gravity by the famous apple falling on his head. In 1667, Newton returned to Cambridge. Newton's first public scientific achievement was a reflecting telescope. In 1672, Newton published his notes on light, optics, and color. In 1687, Newton published the Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. The work gives Newton's three basic laws of motion. The laws help explain nearly every motion in the universe. In 1696, Newton became Warden of the Mint and moved to London. In 1699, Newton was promoted to Master of the Mint. In 1703, Newton was elected President of the Royal Society after Robert Hooke died. And in 1705, he was knighted by Queen Anne of England. Newton became one of the most famous and most wealthy men in Europe. Newton died on March 31st, 1727, at the age of 85 years old. So Newton's first law of motion is also called the law of inertia. And in the first law, it states that an object at rest will remain at rest unless acted on by an unbalanced force. And it also states an object in motion continues in motion with the same speed in the same direction unless acted upon by an unbalanced force. What is inertia? Well, inertia is a property of matter by which it continues in its existing state of rest or uniform motion in a straight line, unless that state is changed by an external force. Where do we see this first law of motion in everyday life? Well, we see the first law of motion when a pilot changes the throttle setting of an engine. We see it when a model rocket gets launched up into the atmosphere. We also see it when the wind changes the direction or motion of the kite. Thank you for watching Who is Newton, what the first law of Newton's is, what inertia is, and where do we see the first law in everyday life. Now I'll show you examples of where we see Newton's first law in everyday life. This is my first example of Newton's first law of motion. In this example, this shows that an object in motion tends to stay in motion, and the water is staying in motion with the four-wheeler until the four-wheeler hits the tree. The water goes out of the container because it's still in motion. Now I will do my next example of Newton's first law of motion. This example explains Newton's first law of motion by an object in motion tends to stay in motion unless acted upon by an outside force. By me as staying in motion, as the skateboard is in motion while I am in motion with the skateboard stops and I continue forward in the same direction as the skateboard was going at the same speed until I hit the ground. This is my third example of Newton's first law of motion. in this example, the quarter will stay at rest even after the card is flicked out from underneath it. The quarter will drop into the glass. Here we go. Okay, try number 2. I must have flicked it up instead of straight across. Just like that. This is my 4th example of Newton's first law of motion. And in this example, it's almost the same as the coin one, just the egg's a little bit heavier, so it shows even more that an object at rest tends to stay at rest. Here we go. This is my 5th and final example of Newton's first law of motion. In this example, I will hit this biodegradable golf ball into the water, and in theory, the golf ball should keep going at the same line, same speed into the sky.
Oh, it's way over there.
The reason why the golf ball went into the water instead of staying up into the sky is because gravity acted upon it, and also the air resistance acted upon it. So that is why. So in this video we learned about Newton and who he was and all his greatest achievements that he has done. And we also learned what inertia is and Newton's first law of motion and how it is used in everyday life. Thank you for watching. I'm Brent Hungerford.